Hi everyone, thank you very much for stopping by and for returning to the old world. Now, unless you've been living under a rock, you've probably seen there's been a big release recently for Warhammer 40,000. The Leviathan box set has landed, and with it comes 10th edition of 40k. So is this a 40k video? Absolutely not, because I've been thinking about what does this mean for the eventual release of Warhammer Old World. Well, firstly, let's look at how the release itself went. Now, historically, there have been issues with limited releases, limited box set releases by Games Workshop. If we look at the 9th edition Dominus box, that's a brilliant example of this, where lots of people, after loads of hype, weren't able to get a box. They felt disappointed, let down. A ton of scalpers were able to get their hands on the boxes, and they were up for sale on secondary selling sites for huge markups. And eventually Games Workshop felt it had to do a made to order run for the people that missed out. This time, in the lead up to 10th edition, we were told that there's loads and loads of products available, but at the same time, local gaming stores were putting the message out to their customers, the local communities, saying things around the lines of, we've put in for 100, we're getting 30. Now, I have to admit that did concern me. My local gaming store was one of the ones that got about a third of what it asked for, which made me wonder whether there really was this big pile of product ready to go, or whether actually it was Games Workshop trying to hold on to as many sales at full RP, recommended retail price, as it could. Now, ultimately, the pre-order did sell out, but it didn't sell out within the first few minutes or first couple of hours. It took a while. So I get the impression that people that wanted a box were generally in a position to get one. And I've not seen a mass outpouring of people complaining that they weren't able to get a copy of Leviathan box set. Indeed, a week after launch, I popped into my local Games Workshop, and they've actually got boxes of Leviathan on the shelves. So I think the release has been handled a lot better insofar as people that wanted to get hold of a copy of the box set have been able to do so. What does this mean for Old World? Because that's why we're here today, isn't it? Well, it does look like, from a preparation perspective, Games Workshop seem to have stepped away from the chaos of some of the previous limited releases, and they've delivered what they set out to achieve. So that suggests to me that they've got it in them to understand the market, know how many volume of products they're going to be able to shift, what the community is looking to purchase from them. So hopefully that means then we're not going to have the situation as we've had with a number of limited releases in the past, where people just can't get their hands on stuff, and that would be really disappointing if that happens. Okay, what else can we think about when it comes to the Leviathan release and the impact on Warhammer Old World? Let's turn to the content of the box. So it's important to remember in the context of this that the Leviathan box set was £150 here in the UK, and we've now seen the price of the rulebook and cards that you get in that box, and they come to about £60, leaving £90 to cover the cost of the circa 70 models that you get in the box. These models being split between two factions. You've got Space Marines, because you've always got Space Marines, and Tyranids. So the models themselves, they are all new sculpts, and from what I've seen so far from the box, they look really good quality, nice detail. I'm not going into the full unboxing. There's enough of that out there already. So I'm just giving you a roundup of my thoughts. So let's take it to the world of Warhammer, the world that was. Now, we know we're not getting a starter box, But we also know that Games Workshop has a bit of an odd definition when it comes to a starter box, saying, oh, if it doesn't come with dice and bits of terrain and things like that, it's not a starter box. So I think we can say that Leviathan's not really a starter box either, and that helps us to draw some conclusions across. So I think it's likely we will get some kind of a box, a limited release box, whatever it is. We'll get something when Warhammer Old World eventually gets released, and it seems the current rumours are most strongly centred on Bretonnians versus Tomb Kings. So if this box, a Brett vs Tomb King box, is anything like Leviathan, we'll see. We're going to get some rules. We might get some cards or something, depending on what the rules look like. And we'll get a bunch of new sculpts in a box that actually feels, for a Games Workshop product, to be pretty decent value. And it's unusual for me to look at a Games Workshop product at RRP and go, yeah, actually that's all right, I'm willing to pay that. So that's a good thing if that gets taken forward as the launch box for Warhammer Old World, with a bunch of nice new sculpts that look pretty cool. The third item to really pick up on, I think, is information. Now, in the run-up to Leviathan, we've seen so much information appearing on Warhammer Community, to the extent it was difficult to keep up with all of the information that was being provided. And I think this really marks a high watermark when it comes to the sharing of information, and shows how far Games Workshop have come since the early 2000s, when they just really didn't communicate at all. They didn't have a social media presence. They barely had an internet presence. White Dwarf was purely a sales magazine, and, well, communication just didn't exist. For Warhammer Old World, we've had the developer diaries now for quite a while. On a roughly monthly basis, we've been getting something. Now, okay, those diaries have been a bit hit and miss, I think, when it comes to their overall usefulness. We skipped June, then we had the preview in July. Now, they did tell us it was going to be a figure. It was a bit disappointing just to see one figure in the July preview. I've done another video on that. Do check it out if you've not already. But again, the direction of travel seems to be, we'll see quite a bit more information coming down the tracks as we get closer to a release date. As an aside, I think from the preview that was done on the 1st of July and the emphasis given on the new Epic game, for me it does create a bit more doubt once again about whether Warhammer Old World is really going to be that autumn release, because we know Epic's now definitely coming. So it may mean something push back 2024. I've even heard people speculating about 2025. So I think we're again back to a watch this space situation. There's one area where I have avoided talking about in any great detail when it comes to comparing Leviathan to any future release of Warhammer Old World. And it is quite a big point, but I don't want to get too far into it at this point in time. And that point is the rules themselves. So within a week of 40k getting released, Games Workshop have been put into the position where they've had to make a number of changes to the rules, to the index cards, which doesn't particularly bode well for the quality of the playtesting. Now, I know with 40k, when you've got 20 odd factions with so many different units, it's really going to be difficult to balance it, and I fully get that. But to see a fair few changes being made really soon after release, that's not great, particularly if people are relying on printed products. I will draw solace at this point by looking back at the May developer diary, where it talks about what the core factions are going to be. And unlike Leviathan, where we're seeing all of the factions launched into a new set of rules with very different stats and ways of working, Warhammer is going to have a much smaller initial release, a much smaller group of factions. So hopefully they'll have the opportunity to really make sure that there's a good sense of both external and internal balance across all of those factions, and then they'll be able to slot in the new factions relatively nicely as they go in order to make sure that everything stays balanced. We know balance is important because of all the balanced data sheets and the work it does tracking tournament results. However, it doesn't have a great track record of keeping games balanced. We've seen that historically in Warhammer Fantasy, and we've seen it a lot in 9th edition of Warhammer 40,000. Yes, they got on top of it, but there were some huge problems. And from what I'm hearing, there's already huge problems in 10th edition with some factions just being so much stronger than others. So how would I wrap all of this up? Well, I think there's a lot of positives from the Leviathan release. The numbers look about right. The box, it offers what feels like good value. The sculpts are nice. And we got a lot of information in the build-up to the release so people knew where they stood and what was going on with the changes. If they take this general approach and apply it to Warhammer Old World, whenever that game happens to get released, I think the release feels like it will run more smoothly than perhaps otherwise would be the case. Just like to take a moment at this point to thank you for listening to me chunter on around Leviathan and how this might apply to Warhammer the Old World. If you've enjoyed this video and maybe some of the others in my back catalogue, do consider subscribing and dropping a like. It all really, really helps. All that remains for me to say is once more thank you for listening. I am returned to the Old World and have a great day.